Hi everybody. I'm very excited to talk to you today about one of my favorite events in speech, oral interpretation of poetry. My name's Joel Supp and I'm entering my 9th year with the Boone Central Speech Program and my 6th year as the head coach of the Cardinals. Let's start with the rules of oral interpretation of poetry. Your speakers will select, cut, and arrange one poem or a series of poems centered around a main theme or the works of one poet. The presentation must include an introduction, which should help the audience understand the poems and or the speaker's main theme. The time frame is 6 to 8 minutes. The speaker must possess a paper manuscript while they perform. They do not have to reference the manuscript, but it must be in their possession at all time. There are no costumes or props allowed, and the speaker may not have assistance or prompts from anyone else. There are 2 disqualification criteria for poetry. The speaker will be disqualified if they don't possess the manuscript, or if the judge requests the manuscript after the speech is over and the speaker doesn't give it to them. That's a disqualification criteria. When developing a speech, I would start with the overall climax to the theme and or story in mind. Work with your student to identify a beginning, middle, and end of the program, and lay out the material in an order to get them there most effectively. If I'm splicing, ensure that the splices fit together and advance your story or theme in a way that makes sense. Once you have your beginning manuscript, work with your students to find the voice, posture, physical characteristics, and vocal variety that each poem needs to differentiate it from the rest. The audience and the judge should be able to discern one poem from the other as the student moves throughout their program. Once the student begins to perform, they can make changes, additions, substitutions, and cuts to hone that program into the best that it can be. I love poetry because there are so many different ways you can approach this event. Students can speak on nearly any appropriate topic that they choose. I've learned so much from many coaches around Nebraska about poetry, and you'll get varied and unique ideas talking with them. However, in my opinion, one piece tends to stand out for me most, and it really has nothing to do with building the program at all. And that piece is finding the topic or theme that your student can identify with. I ask our students to try to embody their theme from head to toe with their voice, their expression, and their bodies, and I find it is much more difficult to do that if the student has no experience with their theme, or they cannot draw a connection between their theme and their own life experiences. This does not mean that a student can't tackle a subject that they haven't experienced personally, but only that they need to find a way to connect their own life experiences, feelings, and emotions to that theme to draw some interpretive inspiration. I always ask my students to research on their own first and try to identify a theme or topic before we meet for the first time, and then we discuss how they are connected to that theme before we move on. A few other areas of note. Students are allowed to splice poems together like I talked about before, meaning the poems can be broken apart and shuffled back together like a deck of cards. And this seems to be the popular trend right now in NSAA speech, and it's what we do most often at Boone Central as well. I have, however, in the past had an NSAA state championship qualifier in poetry that did not splice and just did one poem after the other because she and I both felt that it fit her overall program better. So while splicing is allowed and seems to be the trend, it is not required. Encourage your students to find a wide variety of poems. It doesn't have to be all doom, gloom, and sadness. Think about taking on the challenge of adding an upbeat, inspirational, positive poem into your students' program, even on challenging subject matter. This can provide a more full and well-rounded exploration of the theme and show off your students' versatility as an interpreter and speaker. Always make sure your poems support your theme. Often I judge programs that have 2 really wonderful poems in them, and one that feels like it's a bit of a stretch to get in there with regard to theme. And one final thing, since the use of that manuscript is required, work on ways with your students to make that manuscript an important part of the speech. I hope that little review gives you a great start with your students' poetry program this season.